Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton says that the interior triangle of the passing game is imperative for Bo Nix and the Broncos. They've taken steps to make that a strength this offseason. We'll break that down and much more on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, it is easy to become one. All you have to do is hit that subscribe or that follow button wherever you get your podcast for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more that you get every single day, all year long, including throughout the entire offseason. We got you covered here. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. And look, the NFL annual meeting is taking place in Florida, and we got a lot of great insight from Sean Payton about this Broncos offseason and what's ahead for them here. We'll wrap up today's show by talking about Courtland Sutton reporting for the voluntary offseason program. That is his plan as a sign of good faith and what he hopes to be a contract extension coming his way. We'll also talk about why the Broncos are becoming a destination team for a lot of players and free agents. We're going to kick things off today by highlighting what Sean Payton says the Broncos can do to help boost Bo Nix and the passing game this upcoming season. Sayre, look, obviously Florida Eastern time zone, it was early for all of us in Colorado as Sean Payton met with the media around 5 o'clock a.m. Mountain time. And look, a lot of conversation about the Broncos, the direction in which they're heading. But more importantly, Sean Payton has a clear vision and a clear understanding what they need to do as an organization to help surround Bo Nix with everything that he needs around him to succeed, especially in the passing game where, hey, look, he was the offense. He was the bright spot for them. Now it's about trying to get all the other pieces to align.
Yeah, just like Phil Jackson built the triangle offense around Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant once upon a time, Cody. Now Sean Payton is having to surround his GOAT, Bo Nix, obviously. No, but in all seriousness, that inside triangle that he's talking about, specifically, he's talking about tight end, running back, and he said wide receiver, a third wide receiver or wide receiver 3, essentially, which I took to mean the slot receiver. Cody, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that and assuming that. Hopefully we'll get to hear that press conference from Sean Payton at some point so we can draw better conclusions there. But I think that it's so huge with what we saw last year, isn't it? Where it seemed like if the Broncos weren't getting something outside or a quick pass to the perimeter or a deep pass downfield, that the passing game really was like kind of trudging through quicksand. And so opening up the middle of the field here is going to, just by the very nature of it, open up everything on those, those swing throws, those passes to the outside, the quick throws to Marvin Mims, the quick throws to Troy Franklin, getting Courtland Sutton hopefully available on more slot, or more slant routes, because we didn't see enough of that last year. And so I just feel like having these positions to a point where you can say, hey, we're confident in the guys that we have out there. Like, last year didn't exude a ton of confidence in getting the tight ends involved or the running backs involved in the passing game. It was more so of just hey, by nature of the offense, we kind of have to do these at certain times. Now you have players that you want to put in those positions to really take advantage of what a defense is showing you pre-snap.
Well, one of the things that Sean talked about in his press conference was that, you mentioned that triangle there. Look, you look at the Broncos wide receiver room, I think it's safe to say that they're more confident in that room and they're higher on it. And Sean even told us this back at Radio Row when he was sitting down with Kay Adams, that they believe that they're higher on their wide receiver room than most people think that they are. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be in the equation, maybe adding one in the draft or maybe a veteran option in free agency still maybe being on the table here. But let's talk about tight end being one of the more important ones. That was a dynamic the Broncos offense did not have enough production from last year. Adam Troutman, obviously the leading guy, was the tight end one there. He had, the most receiving yards at 188. Lucas Kroll, who was just in a rotational role, had the most receptions out of any tight end with 19. And then Nate Atkins had a couple of touchdowns here and there. But that was a positional element, Sayre, that outside of the run game being a missing factor last year for the Broncos, the tight end production was also another one. So when you think about it, you're really condensing the offensive production to the outside, to wide receiver, or to, a running back out of the backfield, or your other wide receivers, like it was Marvin Mims and Courtland Sutton. And Marvin didn't really come on strong until the second half of the season. So for the Broncos to capitalize the way that they did and become a top 10 scoring offense last season with some of the deficiencies that they had personnel-wise and scheme-wise, that to me is one of the most mind-boggling things. And to me, I think when you look at that, it gives credence to the notion that, hey, if the Broncos go out there and they find a solidified guy at running back, and it could be somebody already on the roster. That's something Sean Payton already mentioned there, is that they would like to see maybe how the competition plays out with the 4 guys that they have on the roster. But we already know they're going to add. We'll get into that a little bit later on here in this show. But to me, it's like tight end. Evan Ingram's addition is definitely game-changing. And once again, Sean Payton confirmed Engram is that Joker guy, has the Joker traits. We'll play that Joker role here inside of Denver's offense, which to me, you boost that area of the field that you didn't have last year. That makes me excited about what Bo Nix can do here in year number 2.
100%. And I think everybody in Broncos country should be excited about that as well, knowing that Bo is getting better this offseason already. Sean Payton kind of talked about, hey, there are areas that he has to improve, but he's got that grit and the toughness to be able to do it. And I think that with surrounding him with better personnel, I mean, it's not going to require all of Bo Nix's grit and toughness to necessarily get better on his own. Like, he's not going to have to be the tide to raise all boats in the harbor this coming season. Now, will he do that at times? Absolutely. I think he has that trait. And that's something that I think a lot of people disagreed with at the time of the draft, Cody, is that Bo Nix was not a harbor, tide raising type of quarterback. I think we saw his rookie year, like, he definitely is that guy, but that doesn't mean that you skimp on surrounding him with guys. You have to go out and get him playmakers. And I think maybe amongst that triangle that Sean Payton talked about, I think they have one guy solidified, that tight end, right? Evan Engram. He's now in the mix, but I don't necessarily think you have that running back or that wide receiver 3. I know there's options there. I know that Devon Vele can play that big slot role. Troy Franklin will get snaps. Obviously, Marvin Mims is there, but do the Broncos have that slot player like we've talked about with Emeka Egbuka in the past, our previous mock draft that you and I did together? Do they have that type of guy that can get open quickly in the middle there at that slot wide receiver position? I don't know if they have that right now. And I think that could open up an interesting little can of worms here as we get closer to the NFL draft.
Yeah, and look, I think there's little pebbles, little amounts of smoke screen here and there that Sean's going to throw out, because I felt like he was a little more candid than he normally is. But then again, I was like, wait a minute, all right, let's not get fooled by the illusion here. Sean is painting a picture as to, okay, this is where we need to go as a team. What's going to get us there? Well, you look at what the team has in terms of, they have 4 young backs on the roster right now, a running back. That doesn't mean that they're going to not take a running back in the draft. I mean, George Payton himself even said that they're going to take a back in this year's draft. There's going to be extensive competition there. But I think wide receiver is definitely the interesting one in that. Could that one maybe be a position that is in play for round number 1 of the NFL draft? I'll be very curious to see what happens. We're 3.5 weeks away from the draft from taking place. And the Broncos, they'll be on the clock at pick number 20. Maybe they'll trade up. Maybe they'll trade back. But we know one thing's for certain. They are looking to boost this team a little bit further here. And part of that is because the Broncos are becoming a bit of a destination for a lot of people. Just 2 years ago, when Nathaniel Hackett had his fingerprints all over this team and it was disastrous, the state of the Broncos was in shambles. Sean Payton comes in, and the turnaround from year 1 all the way to now is impressive in terms of the perception of the Denver Broncos. Why are the Broncos becoming a destination team right now in the NFL? We'll dive deep into the details that Sean Payton shared with us here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Today's episode, Locked on Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, FanDuel is the perfect place to be for all the action that is March Madness. We have seen some crazy games to start the tournament. We've seen the Sweet 16. We've seen some buzzer beaters, some big-time upsets, and some big-time performances all across college basketball. But not only college basketball, you got the NBA season, which is still ongoing, which FanDuel allows you to get closer in on the action. But stick with the theme of March Madness. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to who is even cutting down the nets at the end of the tournament. Pick your favorites, pick your underdogs, whatever you may have, and stay in on the action inside of the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on college hoops action all tournament long. Once again, it's FanDuel.com, where new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
Broncos Country, I want you to put the word out there that we are back. We are back up. Broncos Country is back. The Denver Broncos are a destination team once again. And what's the reason for that? Or what are the reasons for that? Because obviously this team was kind of in shambles just a couple of years ago, Broncos Country. Well, we're going to be talking about a couple of really cool stories and Sean Payton's explanation of why this team is now a destination franchise once again. But before I say thank you to Broncos Country, I think we all say collective thank you to the birthday boy of today's episode, Cody Roark, the OG, the legendary, the one and only.
You're too
Happy
kind.
birthday to you, Cody. We appreciate you so much for all you do for Broncos Country. The dude is out here posting videos of Riley Moss late on a Sunday evening, folks. I mean, this guy is a grinder, the ultimate. So shout out to Cody for all he does for Broncos Country, and shout out to you, the everyday listeners of the show. Flood the comment section if you're on YouTube, and if you're not on YouTube, hey, go ahead, go do that right now. But flood the comment section with happy birthdays for our guy.
Thank you so much.
Cody, we appreciate you so much, and excited to talk about why the Broncos are a destination team. Obviously, you know, part of the reason is that you cover the team. You're there at practice. You're there in the locker room. I know the players love hanging out with you and getting to chat with you, but other than, you know, getting to rub elbows with Cody Roark, you know, what are the reasons why the Broncos are a destination team for players? Because there was a really cool story put out there by one of the new guys on the beat in Denver, Luca Evans at the Denver Post, posted a cool story about Dre Greenlaw, his free agent pursuits, things like that, and how the Broncos honestly didn't even make Dre the best offer in free agency, but he still chose to come to the Mile High City anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the allure of having a young quarterback. And I think more so having the key word that I'm about to say here is stability in place. The Broncos right now, you look at them, Sayre, they feel very stable in the direction in which they're going. They got their young quarterback in place. They have, you know, they don't have to worry about a contract extension for Bo Nix for quite some time. You know, they got him on a rookie deal. Whereas you look at the opposite, as much as Dre Greenlaw loves San Francisco, as much as his teammate Fred Warner loves him, as much as Dre Greenlaw loved playing alongside Fred Warner and guys on that defense, felt like Denver was a more stable environment in terms of where they were going. And a new start was definitely warranted because, hey, the Broncos, they made their initial offer. And look, a lot of it is because, hey, Dre Greenlaw had that injury in the Super Bowl and he came back, only played in 2 games down the stretch of the season. Right there, it's like you're not going to offer a big-time contract. And even Sean Payton said it at the annual meeting that like Dre Greenlaw, if he didn't get hurt, there's probably a strong chance he doesn't even hit free agency. The 49ers probably find a way to tag him and retain him up. So I think that factor is huge. I mentioned, I teased it right before we got into this segment about how things were with Nathaniel Hackett, the perception of the Broncos as an organization before Sean Payton came in, and then how they've handled the Russell Wilson thing, how they've moved on from that, and how they've built this team. I mean, Sayre, it's impressive, right? Every move that they've made, look, it's all on paper right now. This team is that sleeping giant that George Payton was talking about. He said that I feel like I see that this team could be a sleeping giant when he came in. Well, who would have thought it would have taken all the way from, you know, that time to now 2025? It's like, hey, that sleeping giant, it's awake and it's here, and it is the Denver Broncos. That's the appeal, I think, for why Dre Greenlaw came here to the Mile High City. And not to mention, they mentioned the ties of Talanoa Hufanga. Those two guys having that bond that they have helped sway that a little bit. Not to mention DJ Jones, who used to be teammates, obviously, with Greenlaw as well. That was definitely a big factor there. But, I mean, Sayre, I think that you look at it becoming a destination. Sean Payton mentioned it as well. There are a handful of players on this roster already that have been staying in Denver, that have been training at the team facility all offseason long. And that is a selling point that Sean Payton said. He says, we feel like we reduce injuries. You train here at altitude versus going training somewhere else and then coming here. There's a correlation there in terms of some injuries that they feel like was happening with players. That right there is also like, we'll give you access to everything that you need to be successful. This organization is in a position where they are trending upwards and they are growing. And this is a place to be. And Now you got names. You got the young quarterback. You got a defensive player of the year in your roster. Right now, it's a great time. If you're a Broncos fan, it is a great time to be a member of Broncos Country.
It really is. I mean, we said a couple of years ago, I mean, the Broncos are just a quarterback away, right? And obviously, that quarterback wasn't Russell Wilson, which is, a bummer because you hoped things could work out there. But I think Bo Nix is kind of proving that idea correct. I know it's vastly different roster than it was a handful of years ago, but this team has kind of just felt like, man, it's just a quarterback away from being something, right? And from being maybe even a contender in the AFC West, which I know Sean Payton talked about, like, hey, nobody's going to be, crying for us on our behalf. Like, we've got to go and kind of take care of this on our own. And Bo Nix is the reason why I think that this team is a destination. Like, I know that it's not all him. I know that he had the backing of a really good defense last year as a rookie, but the guy put together, if not for Jaden Daniels, would have been the most historic rookie year for a quarterback ever. And it just so happened that another guy in his same class had, a similar type of season there. And so with Bo being as good as he is, in this early in his career, and the Broncos having flexibility, they get out of the Russell Wilson deal as of next year, no more dead cap on their salary cap. And you have all this flexibility. You got the new facility coming in. You've got the cash rich ownership group. I mean, all these things work together. And I saw that, I think it was Jeff Duncan, the guy who covers the New Orleans Saints and has covered them for a really long time. I think he posted out there, Cody, in regards to that Dre Greenlaw story, that Sean Payton is an elite recruiter. Like, if he wants somebody, he's going to get him. And have we not seen that in spades already? Not just this offseason, but dating back. I mean, this offseason alone, you have the Dre Greenlaw story now, but you also have Evan Engram, who the Broncos, I think it's an underrated piece of that story, that they stole him basically from the Chargers. He left Denver to go visit the Chargers, where they had a literal college coach. Jim Harbaugh has been recruiting guys better than most for the last 10 years. And Sean Payton outdid him and got Evan Engram into the building in Denver. So I love that. There's this difference of opinion out there that some people are jumping ship to get out of Denver, and then there's other guys that just really want to be there, and like many people that really want to be there and literally aren't leaving. They had to pry Bo Nix out of the facility after the Buffalo playoff game. So I just think it's funny, the perception of things, but Sean Payton knows how to sell people on vision, and I think that's maybe the biggest reason, Cody, why we're seeing the Broncos become a destination team right now.
Well, and I think you look at Kansas City as well, for as talented as they are, and they got Patrick Mahomes, they got Andy Reid, and obviously as they keep that core nucleus together as much as they can, look, they're still always going to be the biggest threat to the Broncos' dreams and goals. And look, obviously one of the topics at the NFL annual meeting is maybe voting on playoff restructuring. I know I'm in favor of it. The Broncos are not. The Broncos, Sean Payton said that we believe winning the division is important to what we want to do. And so, even if you don't win your division, but you have a better record, you're not going to necessarily have that advantage. So I think it is win your division, have the chance to get a home game. Okay, then go take care of business there. That is the goal here. But I feel like the window for Kansas City is closing, and the Broncos, they have this perfect window right now, this perfect timeline to go through and to dent that armor as much as they can. We've seen that the Broncos can compete with Mahomes, with the Chiefs. They've got to avoid those things that, you can't make some of the mistakes that you made necessarily against Kansas City. Like at Arrowhead, you have a blocked field goal because you had a tendency on film that showed up a little too often on special teams. A third down, you broke contain a little bit on a couple of times where Patrick Mahomes made a play that extended a drive there. Denver's close. Denver's very close. And I feel like 2025, this is the perfect opportunity for them to kick down the door and take back the AFC West, which has been in Kansas City's hands for way too long. And obviously the Chargers are making moves as well. That's going to be another tough team. The Broncos didn't beat the Chargers at all last season. You have to find a way to do that. But I'm excited about it. The optics right now for this Broncos team are very high, not only from our perspective. And look, obviously I get a close look every day in person during the season, but the players inside that locker room love the direction in which the team is heading. And they got rid of a lot of guys in that locker room. And that was the vibe there, is like, hey, we have a lot of young voices now that aren't afraid to speak up and they aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. Guys were apparently content with 1, 2, 3 Cancun in previous years, whereas new guys are like, no, I'm not used to this. This isn't who we are. And so I like the mentality shift that the Broncos have had. It starts with the young guys in place. And hey, look, The sleeping giant is here. So NFL, you better wake up because the Broncos, they're coming. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of optimism about where they're at right now. And I think it's very valid for Broncos fans to be feeling that way. We'll see if the rest of the NFL world catches on here. But we're not done yet. Broncos Country still got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show as it pertains to contract extensions. We all know that Courtland Sutton is looking for one, and he's actually going to be attending the team's voluntary workout program as a sign of good faith. What does that mean for a timeline regarding his potential extension and what that may look like? We'll break that down much more here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. As we dive into the fourth quarter action of today's episode of the show, we'll talk about Courtland Sutton, his pending contract extension that he is looking for, what that means for the team, and certainly when is the timeline going to be here for the Broncos to open up those discussions? We'll break that down here in today's episode of the show. Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day, however you choose to do so. If you're not yet an everydayer, as I said, it's easy to become one. Subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast for daily Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more. Sayre, obviously, some big news here. Following the NFL annual meeting, it was reported early on Sunday morning that late Sunday night, that Broncos wide receiver Courtland Sutton does plan on attending the team's voluntary offseason program, whereas last year he did not. He spent his time in Florida working out, going through some rehab because he did have ankle surgery in the offseason that year. But now he will be in the building for voluntary team workouts as he's looking to get a new contract extension. And I think there's a lot of differentiating factors about like maybe what he's looking for in terms of a contract, but also the Broncos, they have a timeline as well as to when they maybe start looking at contracts for players who need an extension.
Yeah, George Payton said pretty clearly at the NFL owner meetings that it's going to be after the draft. And so there's no gray area here that, hey, before the draft, could we see something? No, it sounds like the Broncos are putting these things on the table until after the 2025 NFL draft. And from what Mike Kliss reported, Cody, our good friend over there at 9 News, it sounds like there hasn't even really been like, I can't remember the term that he used to describe it, but there hasn't even really been like a, hey, we're at the negotiating table for some serious discussions right now. It's really more so been of the preliminary like talk variety. But I think parameters are kind of out there already. If you want to look at other veterans that have signed deals that Courtland Sutton's would be comparable to, I think our one of our good friends pointed out like, hey, Calvin Ridley has kind of the ideal potential contract to look at 4 years, $92 million. He signed the deal when he was 30 years old or going into his age 30 season. He got $50 million in guaranteed money. So that's a total of $23 million per year, $50 million in guarantees. And I feel like Courtland Sutton is probably going to get something very similar to that. And Mike Kliss did report, Cody, that the extension is expected to be north of 20 million. He basically just kind of threw out the question, like, the question is how much more than 20 million average annual value is it going to be? And how much in guaranteed money is Sutton going to get? Those are the big questions that we're looking at right now, but it does feel, especially the way Sean Payton was talking about it too, it feels like Courtland getting an extension is a foregone conclusion at this point. I don't know how much the NFL draft is really going to change that, but certainly the market value for him is kind of out there already.
Well, yeah, and you look at his production too. The NFL is always a "what have you done for me lately" business. In the last 2 years of Courtland Sutton's play, I mean, has been incredible to watch. 18 total touchdowns, Sayre. I mean, he's been the primary go-to guy. You need a clutch catch on fourth down, and it's like fourth and however long, and you get your toe, you 2 feet in on a toe tap with just an inch to spare is what was NFL Next Gen Stats' most improbable reception, I think. And since they've been tracking it, and obviously what he had against the Buffalo Bills a couple of years ago on Monday Night Football, Courtland's just a guy that comes up big. And of course, you look at, I think, the large volume of targets that Courtland has had in the last couple of years. And of course, like, he has struggled with drops from time to time, but he's also making more plays and he is making more negative plays that harm you, right? And I think Courtland is a guy who has been through so much change here in this organization, so much instability. He has grown into becoming that Broncos #1 wide receiver. Now, I think there's a debate to be had there, especially when you look at like other wide receivers around the league, like an A.J. Brown. Courtland's skill set's a little bit different than a guy like A.J. Brown, who's a true wide receiver 1 for that team. You know, so I don't know what the classification will be here for the Broncos. $23 million a year sounds like the ideal spot. 23, 24. I'm okay with the Broncos paying that. Once again, it's not my money, but I understand and I want to emphasize here how important Courtland Sutton is for Bo Nix. These two guys spend so much time together with their wives. You know, they hang out by themselves together, you know, just away from the team facility. They've got that chemistry. They've got that rapport. And you obviously saw that last year in a couple of big moments. I remember the Raiders game in Vegas where Bo Nix suffered those transverse process fractures in his back. And, you know, you needed a big play. He fires up a shot to Courtland Sutton, who catches a crazy touchdown there. Those guys have such an important dynamic together. You look at the numbers of third down. Bo was obviously favorite target to go to Courtland on third down. That right there is so big. But obviously you need other guys to start stepping up at wide receiver to take that pressure off. The addition of Evan Engram will certainly help. Marvin Mims certainly helps. We'll see about Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, and whether or not they add a receiver. But Courtland is that guy. And I think taking him away from Bo, for everything that Sean Payton and George Payton are talking about, building this team around him, getting him the best players, that would be counterintuitive to that if they took him out of the equation and said, we're not going to extend him, and then this is going to be the last year we have with him, and we're going to move on. I don't think that would be the move here, but all signs point to Courtland getting that extension, which I think is deserved. And this might even be a hot take, Sayre. I feel like what we have seen from Courtland, I feel like he still has his best football to be played ahead of him. Look, I think the injury early on, the ACL, threw things off. He came back, you know, tried to get his feet on him, you know, the year or two afterwards. I think that Courtland is going to be playing his best football for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that is why the Broncos should maximize this window here with him and Bo Nix.
I do too. I think that it's justified to extend him. I think that Courtland, when he gets this extension, because it seems like a matter of when, not if, he's going to face a lot more scrutiny from the fan base. And I think the Broncos have to protect him from that in a way, you know, like as best they can. This may sound super obvious, but like you've got to get Courtland Sutton as many one-on-one opportunities as possible. That's not to say, hey, chuck the ball up to him and see if he can come down with it as many times as you can every game, but get him single coverage as often as possible. And how do you do that? Well, adding Evan Engram, like you said, Cody, that's going to help, but it might necessitate a wide receiver earlier in this draft if it's somebody that you feel can create separation and draw attention early on in plays, because if you're paying Courtland a bunch of money, the expectation from the fan base is going to be, hey, he's getting paid what quarterbacks used to get paid, right? And so now the perception of him is he can't lead the team in drop percentage. He can't be inconsistent for stretches of time during the season, you know, and that expectation I think is going to be justified because Courtland does make ridiculous catches and he does have stretches of, I don't want to say dominant play because I don't know that we've seen dominance from him, but we've seen some like, man, the dude is on a heater, you know, sort of a situation. If he's going to be getting paid upwards of 23, 24 million per year, it ain't our money, but the expectations will rise from the perception of the fans, no doubt. And that doesn't mean necessarily anything. Like the Broncos are going to do business as they want to do it. But at the same time, you have to, if you're making that investment in Courtland, you have to maximize what he does best. And what he does best is dominate single coverage. And when he's able to get single coverage consistently, I think this offense is really going to start taking off. And so that's where I feel like, okay, you got to plan a couple steps ahead. If you're the Broncos, you know, you want to extend Courtland, you want to maximize him in his early 30s, because we know he's not a 4-4 guy. He's not a 4-3 guy. He is a ball dominant, big body, you know, contested catch receiver. How do you maximize a guy like that in his early 30s? You have to get players who draw attention away from him. So that's what I would say is like it's not even an issue that I have with extending Sutton, because again, it's not our money. I don't care what the Broncos do. They're in a window right now. Go for it. Do what you think is best for your team, for your locker room. We love Courtland Sutton. He's a Jersey guy for sure. But at the same time, if you're going to make that investment in him, you better find a way to maximize that investment by putting guys around him to make him better as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the direction in which the Broncos are heading. And I understand the gambles of looking at some of your younger receivers saying, hey, we hope that this guy could take over. But let's be honest, and this isn't a shot at Devon Vele, but it's like I see a lot of conversation about Devon Vele and that, you know, hey, they got Devon Vele. They don't need to go out and get another wide receiver. Devon Vele is 27 years old, if we're looking at it, and obviously has some very impressive athletic traits to him, good size to him. But the expectation that you're going to have 7th rounder Devon Vele all of a sudden just jump and become wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 if Courtland wasn't here, I think is a wild assumption for a lot of people to say, hey, that's a reasonable expectation. Devon Vele can be a very good role player inside of this offense here for Sean Payton. And a lot of people make the Marcus Colston comparison there to him. Okay, let him become that. Let him get into that role. But to expect that he's going to be that right away is wild to me. It's a little asinine to think that. So I'm all on board with the Broncos extending Courtland, adding another receiver here while still developing their other guys, because you have to have an insurance policy in place in case the development or what you expect of those guys doesn't get to where it needs to be, or if there's an injury. I think Denver is one injury away at wide receiver from being like, oh no, what's going to happen? I think that has to also be heavily under consideration here as the Broncos maneuver the rest of the offseason, where they could still add a veteran running back. They could still add potentially a veteran wide receiver at this point before the draft, after the draft. Everything is on the table here. But Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. We appreciate you so much for tuning in, rocking with us here for another episode, Locked on Broncos. For all you everydayers out there, here's what we're going to break down. You sent in your mock drafts, and we had one Broncos fan who was orange crushing it with their latest mock draft. We will break that down, share our thoughts and our analysis on their selections as well. Did it move the needle for the Broncos on offense and on defense? We'll break that down much more in tomorrow's episode of the show.